It's been referred to as the last colonialist, hunting for oil and raw materials in Africa to feed its fast-growing economy. Online platforms are filled with discussions on whether it is good for Africa. But the jury is still out on China's growing interests on the African continent.
I think it's been a uniquely positive development. I mean, if I can just put it in a historical context, if you go to Fort Jesus in the museum, you'll find Chinese porcelain from the 15th century. So they've been here before, they're coming back again. This time, obviously, they've come back in a very big way. And I think the key thing that's happened is that they have balanced the demand side of the African equation. Previously, we relied on the West, and the West was not able to support the demand side, so we had these boom-bust cycles. China's arrival is like the foundation stone under Africa's resurgence.
Economists say China has shuffled the relative importance of certain political and economic tools and offered a different style of engagement with Africa, and that China's bilateral engagements should be seen as a positive catalyst for African governments to further their own economies and diversify their relations.
I think if you just look at the stats, since 2000, BRICS share of the BRICS themselves share of world trade has gone from 6% to more than 12%. That was up until 2008. And currently the BRICS share of GDP is around 15% of global GDP. So very significant player in global affairs. And I think Africa is very much being tied to those developments, given the tremendous thrust of BRIC trade, BRIC investment, particularly China, which has occurred since 2000, broadly speaking, since the turn of the century.
China has taken a front row seat in infrastructure development in Africa, from the Copper Belt in Zambia, major roads in Nairobi, and even sports stadia. It looks like the fastest growing economy is not stopping.
Beginning of the smelting. Since this is the copper is rich here in Zambia and Copper Belt nearby the DRC, so that's why we come here, and we do the business together with the Zambian, the government and people. We want the development together.
The continent of Africa is facing an infrastructure deficit of about $75 billion. Countries can mobilize about $45 billion of that with the help of traditional donors. That leaves a $30 billion financing gap. China can help to fill it.
Some major highlights for China's involvement with Africa include, in October 2000, China announced it would cancel more than $1 billion in debt owed to it by poor African countries. In 2006, China declared it the Year for Africa. And in March 2010, China cancelled 50% of unpaid loans which Zambia got for the construction of the Tanzania-Zambia Railway. And in January 2010, China cancelled the debt owed to it by 31 African countries. China's funding and debt cancellations was initially seen as a way in which African governments can leverage against global lenders such as the IMF and the World Bank. But now even these global lenders are backing China's interests on the continent.
Well, China, as you say, is taking more and more room in the Africa economics, which is good. Still, the share of China is small, but increasing very rapidly. And there is no reason why the African will refuse this help or investments coming from China. The only point is that when an African country is discussing with China, you have a huge country discussing with a generally much smaller country. So we have to take care that the relationship are fair enough. And that may be the role of the IMF, to help African countries to deal with the Chinese. We did it in DRC, for instance, to make sure that the deal done on mining will be certainly beneficial for the Chinese. If not, they won't do it, but also beneficial for the people of DRC.
Some analysts, though, feel that China could be taking Africa for a ride. An email comment read, "It's a whole new scramble for Africa, only this time it's from the East," with others saying that China's strategy is short-term, partial and temporary. But just how sustainable is China's relationship with Africa?
China is here for the long term. I think Western commentary, and it's been a little bit of propaganda, I think is unfair. I think the Chinese have done a great deal to unlock the potential on the continent. Obviously, there are problems, things like poaching and stuff like that. But that's to do with the nation state. You got to penalize people. But as a whole, I think the West doesn't like the hot breath of competition on its collar, and that's what China's done.
The China-Africa relationship is both industrial and political. By getting to pillow talk with African states using debt relief, no strings attached aid and easy loans, political analysts say that African governments could begin warming up and voting in favor of China at the UN General Assembly as a voice of the poor.
If you look at Brazil, for example, the focus or the prioritization of Africa is quite remarkable. Since President Lula came into power, he had paid 6 official visits to Africa in his official capacity. By the time he'd paid 1 to the Eurozone. Now, this obviously indicates the strategic priorities housed within this broader South-South cooperation dialogue, which incorporates Africa, North and Sub-Saharan, and really sees Africa at the helm of many of these shifts. One other anecdote that you can take is if you look at the Copenhagen summit from last year, the basic alliance of Brazil, South Africa, India and China really having a tremendous bearing on the outcome of a global summit. These shifts are increasingly incorporating Sub-Saharan Africa from a commercial viewpoint and a strategic viewpoint, and they need to be leveraged.
It is increasingly clear what China is getting out of the growing relations: oil, raw materials. But beyond that, experts say China has big economic plans in Africa and is establishing a foothold in Africa's potentially large consumer markets. But what's in it for Africa?
China is interested in Africa's natural resources, so is America, and so is the Eurozone. So first of all, what Africa needs to do, the low-hanging fruit, is to use the money that is gained, use the capital that is invested in natural resources, and the money gained from trade with China to reinvest into local industrial and manufacturing capacities.
The experts have spoken, but what do ordinary citizens feel about the relationship between China and Africa? I posted a random discussion on Twitter. Take a look at this.
Kenyan students have always seen the West as a place to be for higher learning. But Kenyan students in China are excited about the prospects that China has to offer. Some had to study Chinese and Mandarin, but some were ecstatic to find a medical school that's taught in English.
If you look back 30 years ago, Kenyan GDP per capita was the same as China. Today, look where China is. As Africans, we want the Chinese to come here and take us on that path that they took 30 years ago.
Now, it has always been about China in Africa, but now experts say it is about China and Africa. And with global bodies such as the International Monetary Fund saying China could lead the world out of the recession, friend or foe, it seems the die has been cast.